after the baby was born?
So after I had my son, things changed quite drastically, actually. So prior to having my son, there were symptoms that I didn't realize were symptoms. I would have pain in my joints, that, you know, doctors, my parents would kind of be like, oh, it's just muscle pain. And I would be tired way more often than I should be. And it was, oh, you're staying up too late. And even if I would try to sleep as much as possible, I would still always be tired. And then after my son, that got worse. It got to the point where, like my knees and my shoulders and my elbows were constantly aching, and I would have trouble standing up from even just sitting on the couch. And at first I thought I was just, okay, I'm adjusting to carrying the weight of a baby in my arms, which, I mean, I've been carrying a baby in my stomach plus amniotic fluid, so why carrying a baby in my arms would have made a big difference to my knees. I don't know why my brain went there, but that was the only logic I could come up with. And I was sleeping all the time. Like I would sleep all night because my husband at the time was doing the night feedings a lot of the time. And then I would nap when my son napped. So even like as a newborn, he would sleep most of the day. So I would sleep most of the day, and I would still be constantly exhausted. So he was born in June. Come November, I finally went, this is enough. I'm in so much pain and I'm so tired all the time. I need to find out what's happening. So I, at that point, went in, they did blood tests, and that's when we started looking into the potential that it was an immune issue. So right now, the diagnosis that I have is mixed connective tissue disease, celiac disease, and then we originally diagnosed lupus, but my doctor now is on the fence on that and thinks that possibly the mixed connective tissue and the celiac disease together with my fibro may have given us kind of a weird false positive on the lupus, which is actually good news because that means that I would not run the risk of the organ issues that I would have if it was actually lupus. So things were very different. Life was very, very different. I wasn't able to, go out and run the way that I was able to. I wasn't able to even like grocery shop for a long time after having my son. So there was a huge change after having him.
And what are things currently like for you right now, and especially with taking COVID into consideration?
So right now, it's been up and down. So since I've had my son, there have been a few other weirdly unrelated issues that have happened. So I had, back in March of 2018, I had, for no discernible reason, one of my lumbar spine discs, I don't think that's the right way to say it, but one of the discs in my lumbar spine decided that he wasn't enjoying the party anymore and just herniated completely out of my spine. When you look at the MRIs, there's literally like millimeters of the disc left within my spinal column. The rest of it was out and it was crushing my spinal cord. So
are you able to walk?
I am now. By the time they found out what was going on, I was paralyzed in my left leg and in a wheelchair because the emergency room and my family doctor kept trying to tell me, oh, it's just sciatica. The pain you're feeling is just sciatica. And like, yeah, I lost all feeling in my left leg. I was in a wheelchair. I was in intense pain. And it wasn't actually until I lost bladder control that the ER took me seriously and did an MRI that they had to sedate me for because I could not unbend at the waist and lie down, and went, oh crap, you need surgery and you need it now if you ever want to walk again or not be in diapers. So normally their orthopedic surgeon at the hospital here in London works like 9 to 5, and they called him in at 4 o'clock in the morning. And by 6 a.m. I was on the table and being operated on. It was that dire, which again, to kind of go back to the medical PTSD, I had been there 2 weeks prior, and the ER doctor at that point in time said, it's just sciatica, and basically said, here's a shot for the pain, get out, we need the beds.
Can you explain what sciatica is?
So sciatica is where the sciatic nerve, which is one of the ones that runs from the base of your spine down through your butt and your thigh, gets compressed. And so you get like a sharp pain and some numbness through your butt and down the back of your thigh. And because the way that my pain originally started through my thigh, that's what they thought it was. But then when it progressed, when I started getting numbness and tingling, that's where they should have went, you know what, there's something more wrong here. What I ended up with is something called cauda equina, which is where the disc compresses your entire spinal cord. And it can cause paralysis. So they had to operate very quickly. They had to take the entire disc out. They had to cut a portion of the vertebrae that was left so that my spinal cord basically could swell up and then come back down to a normal size. And then I have a fusion with titanium where that disc should be holding the one above and like the vertebrae above and below, so that they don't grind against each other, essentially.
In our last episode of the previous season, we were speaking with my friend Nikki, who had a lot of experiences in emergencies since she'd been diagnosed with breast cancer. And we talked about kind of the bedside manner of doctors in general. How did you find when you would go to emerge? Did you find that doctors would say, oh, you're exaggerating, or would they question your motives or something like that? Like, did you have any negative experiences, or did you have some good experiences?
For the most part, my experiences with ER doctors have been very negative, because it took a lot of time to figure out what was going on as far as my pain, as far as my celiac disease. I would often be in going, I'm experiencing this intense pain. I can't move this body part. I've got numbness here. And at this point, I would not be surprised if there's a flag on my file as a drug seeker. Oh. And so I feel like that's probably why when I went in the 2 weeks prior to my surgery, they just said, here's, Toradol, which is an anti-inflammatory. It's not an opiate or anything. There's no euphoria or anything that you get from it. They just said, here's Toradol, get out. So that's, at this point, I will avoid the ER at all costs because of that.
I was going to say.
Not because of COVID.
No.
No, not because of COVID.
But, when I'd gone into the ER a couple times 3 years ago when I had like pneumonia that just didn't go away the whole summer, every time I'd go in, they think I had a blood clot. And they would test me for blood clots, and they would ask me questions about blood clots. And I'd say to them, I've had pneumonia like 25 times. I know what this feels like. This is pneumonia. Give me a chest x-ray, give me antibiotics, and send me home. And they would keep me waiting in ER all day and be like, oh, well, we need to test this. We need to test this. Are you sure you don't have a blood clot? And if you have a blood clot, you could die and all this. And I'm going, I just have pneumonia. I'll be okay.
Have you found, Max, that your treatment from doctors and in hospitals has changed since you have started identifying as gender non-binary?
A little bit, yeah. For the most part, especially with the fact that London Health Sciences is a teaching hospital, and I deal with a lot of younger doctors. They're mostly open. Some of the issues that I run into is because I haven't done the legal name change, I have to give the name that's on my health card, and then they have Max as a preferred name. Most of the doctors will use my preferred name, and a lot of the time you can tell that they're not really sure what they're going to be walking into when they open the door. So you can see that look on their face of like, what's gonna be in here? It's like, yeah, what's behind door number 3? And so that's always a little bit awkward. But one of the bigger things I've noticed is one of the hospitals I deal with is a Catholic hospital. And to work there, you don't have to be Catholic, but I know a few of the people who work there are. And so there is one department in particular, I'm not going to call anybody out, but there is one department in particular where, despite having a preferred name, the receptionist will only use my birth name, which it is uncomfortable, because in my personal life, I haven't used that name in almost a year. Actually, because she uses my full birth name, and I've been going by a nickname of my birth name for a solid 2 years. It's been a while since I've actually used that name in my personal life. So yeah, it's definitely an uncomfortable experience when that happens. But for the most part, it's okay. It's just it's that weird kind of, not knowing what to expect. There is, like, recently I did ask about testosterone, low dose testosterone, just so that I can get some more androgyny with myself, voice changes. So right now, obviously, I sound very feminine. So with low dose testosterone, you do get some lowering of the voice range. Any new fat deposits that you get tend to go not towards like hips and thighs. They would go more to like belly, things like that, like a dude, chest area. And I was talking about top surgery. And as the doctor was, describing some of the necessities of being on testosterone, you can hear the awkwardness as they're trying to navigate talking about female body parts. They're like, he was trying to tell me that I would still need pap smear. And so I don't know if it was because he was male or if it was just awkwardness in general, but he's like, so just because you're on testosterone, you can't just, you have to, and he just was stumbling over himself so much just to tell me that cervical health is still important. And I'm like, dude, I realize that this isn't going to take away my cervix. I still have those parts.
If you think back so we're taping this October 2020. If you think back to 5.5 years ago, who was in North American culture, who was the person that we saw representing the trans community on television? Caitlyn Jenner. Okay,
Caitlyn Jenner and RuPaul, and
RuPaul, and so you're thinking about that.
Identifies male, though.
Yes,
So
he does. He
And
does. He's a drag queen, but people do look towards him, not realizing that he is not transgender.
Yeah, and I know he has said, hasn't he said some negative things about transgender individuals as well? So you think about what we had 5.5 years ago, that Caitlyn Jenner was like the first person to say, I am not a man, I identify as a woman now.
Yeah.
And you think about how we actually have come quite a bit far from that, because we are actually now at the point where we can say, well, Caitlyn Jenner, regardless of gender, is not a very good person.
Exactly.
Not a very good person, not somebody I would want to associate with.
I feel like at that point we had Laverne Cox, who was on Orange is the New Black, but she had already transitioned. She was fully transitioned at that point. Caitlyn Jenner, I think, is the first person we saw their journey. Yeah. From their assigned gender to their actual gender. And you're right, people didn't want to say anything bad because at that point there was kind of that stigma of if you say something bad about a trans person, you're transphobic.
But I think if the whole point is about being, if somebody does something bad in society, like for example, I don't know if it was proven that Caitlyn Jenner was caused the crash that killed that person. So my pop culture knowledge is not very good. So our listeners, but
Same.
even so, everybody should be criticized equally for their actions.
Exactly. Yeah, you can't say this person's a bad person because they're a bad person and have people say you're transphobic for saying that.
Exactly.
If you say this person's a bad person because they transitioned, that's one thing. But if Caitlyn Jenner says, awful, terrible, racist things, she hasn't, but let's say Caitlyn Jenner, for example, were to say that, and you say she's a bad person because of that, that's not transphobic. That's just
she's a bad person.
The truth.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I just want to come back to the name thing for a bit, because I know you and Cynthia both talked about it off the top of the show, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
So personally with me, because my full name is Jacqueline Nicole, and because I'm only called Jacqueline in either through government documentation or in the healthcare system, I started associating Jacqueline with medical procedures. And
that makes sense.
I've actually wanted to change my name permanently to Jackie. And I mean, I identify as female, but I don't mind when people call me Jack. I have a coworker who always calls me Jack, and I think it's adorable, and I love it. And my parents called me Jack growing up as well, but I've thought about legally changing my name just to Jackie. And I just wondered for you, with your, what you call your dead name now, if also part of that was some medical trauma linked to that name.
I think there's negativity in general, because now the only time I use that name is it's going to the doctor, it's talking to my bank, or it's calling customer service for, say, my internet or something. And you generally don't call the bank or your service provider if good things are happening. You call because there's something wrong. So, yeah, absolutely, there's negativity surrounding it at this point, whether it be because I'm going to the doctor's office and I already have trauma surrounding it, or because I'm calling somewhere that I don't want to be calling. Thankfully for my family doctor, they have me on file as Max, and they don't use my dead name at all, period. They call me by Max. When they call me, they look me up by Max. When I call them, I'm assuming my dead name is still on file as far as OHIP billing purposes. But to my family doctor's office, I'm Max. End of story. But they're very progressive there. They're amazing. But otherwise, yeah, all of my specialists, I have to give my dead name. And so it is absolutely, there is immense negativity surrounding it at this point, because I haven't used it for anything but those for at least since April.
Max, Sarah, our other co-host, wasn't able to make it today, but she had a question about your migraines.
Yeah, sorry to hear that she couldn't be here. What was it she was looking to find out?
I think she has migraines herself, and I think she wanted to just know about your experience with migraines as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Mine are hereditary. My grandmother on my dad's side has them. My dad has them. My youngest sister has them. And my son, unfortunately, looks like he's starting to get them. So it is definitely hereditary. I have very few what you would call triggers. So a lot of people with migraines have specific triggers where they can learn to avoid these things and they don't get the migraines. For me, not so much. I know for a fact that dehydration is one of them. So if I don't stay well hydrated, then I definitely get migraines. So I drink a lot of liquids. Water is boring. We all know this. I drink as much as I can, but I do drink other liquids. And thankfully, with my doctors, sage advice, I don't restrict myself specifically because, as she said, as long as it's not alcohol, if it's a liquid, it's a liquid. Things like caffeine they're not diuretic enough to have a dehydrating effect that's going to negate the amount of liquid that you're taking in. So I can still drink like pop and stuff like that. Weather changes. So my migraines are most prevalent in spring and fall when the barometric pressure goes from high to low to high to low really quickly. Other than that, I can be in the middle of a grocery store and have one hit in an instant. It's happened where I will be pushing my cart down the aisles, just looking for, rice or something, and it literally feels like there's an ice pick right here. And mine will go from just above my ocular region and head back towards about the middle here. And that's why they're called migraines. Migraines is literally like half of your head, is the translation. So it's this portion of my head. And I get them so bad that I actually had a stroke during one of them. And I didn't know it because I just thought it was a really bad migraine. But it was actually, it was a hemorrhagic stroke in my temporal lobe.
Oh.
And that's why I pause as much as I do when I'm talking. That's why I lose words, because it was in my language centers. It took me a while I didn't necessarily lose the ability to speak completely, but I did have some instances of aphasia where I couldn't talk temporarily. I used to be prolific at creative writing. It took me almost 5 years to even start writing again because I didn't have the ability to make the words flow the way I wanted. And so it was incredibly frustrating, and I gave up for a while. And even now, like I was talking to my girlfriend last night, and I could not think of a word. I was trying to send her a voice memo on Facebook Messenger, and I gave up. I gave up on trying to think of the word. I was like, sorry, hon, I don't know what word I'm thinking of, but this is what I'm trying to say. And she messaged back. She's like, this is the word you want. And it was exactly the word I wanted, but I just could not retrieve it from wherever it was stored in my head.
And soon enough, that'll start happening to you as you get older anyway. You'll start to
Exactly.
forget words. You'll start to forget words. So we are going to have to wrap up. But one last question before we go is what advice kind of would you give to anybody else who doesn't identify either as male or female and they're going into a healthcare setting? What advice would you give them?
Advocate for yourself. Stand up for yourself. Don't let doctors push you around, especially for people who were assigned female at birth, because a lot of the time they will, be like, oh, it's because you're female, whatever, that you're having this issue. And so not only are you getting that negation of your gender identity, you're also getting pushed off as, because of your assigned sex at birth, this is what's happening. So advocate for the symptoms you're having and what you feel in your gut is correct. So if you don't think you're getting the right diagnosis, push until you do get the right diagnosis. Because again, a lot of times people who do identify outside of the gender binary, people don't take as seriously. They figure, if you're crazy or whatever enough to think that you're not male or not female, then you must be making things up. Because if you've got this made up gender, clearly your medical condition is made up as well. I've seen it happen to friends of mine in the US medical system, thankfully not in Canada, but in the US medical system, I've seen it happen. So be your own advocate and push your doctors if you have to, switch doctors if you have to, until you get the answers that you deserve.
I was going to say that's a great message, because that's pretty much what our podcast is about telling people stories so that other people can help feel like they have the power to advocate for themselves in medical settings. And that's really the point we're always trying to get across on What's the Difference podcast. So Max, thank you so much for joining us today. We have a very big season lined up for you with all kinds of topics. We're going to be talking about culture and disability in our next episode. That might end up being a 2-part episode because we have a lot to say. And we're going to be talking about alcoholism and addictions, as well as other chronic illnesses, and as well as fashion and beauty when it comes to disability. Why aren't there more fashion designers taking people with disabilities into account? So we're going to be talking about that this season. We're going to be talking about portrayals in film and TV of people with disabilities. So we can't wait to have you on board for the rest of the season. It's going to be an exciting one. I will be probably taking off part way because my baby is expected in 4 months. So we're going to try to get as many episodes out as we can before my baby's born. But we've got a lot coming up. We're really excited with what we have planned for us this season. As always, you can find all of our episodes at whatsthedifferencepodcast.ca. Feel free to connect with us on Facebook and Instagram at What's the Difference Podcast. We're on Twitter now at Podcast WTD. We didn't realize that What's the Difference Podcast was too long a handle and wondered why they kept cutting us off. Apparently it's only 15 characters, but yes, you can find us at Podcast WTD on Twitter. And of course, reach out to us by email at whatsthedifferencepodcast@gmail.com. Thank you, Sam. It was great to see you back here again.
It's so nice to be back.
Yes, and we'll see you throughout the season. We miss Sarah, but Sarah will be coming back probably in the next episode. Cynthia, thank you again for your
No problem.
And Max, this has been amazing. So thank you
Thanks
for joining
for
us
having
today.
me.
Okay, take care, everyone. We'll see you in episode